Hello there. No Ronan this time? Well, he must be off playing with the new toys he got from his godfather, since it's the Christmas holidays. We want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas. May it bring you quality time with the people you love the most. We certainly hope the light of Christmas shines bright in your life at the moment, and if it doesn't, we pray it soon does and that we can at least provide a welcome distraction until everything gets sorted out. I almost feel a bit sad to say this, but welcome to episode 10 of the Hounds of Hübschdorf. Yes, it's not the final episode yet, there's still one left, but still, time does seem to fly by when you're having fun. Ludlov is not having fun yet. Even though our main character seems to have dealt with the main threat in the story, the adventure is not quite over, especially not for our young initiate. So today we offer you the next 3 chapters to our dark fantasy story: The Hunter's House, Rest Assured, and The Return to Hübschdorf. That sounds like this is the final episode, but you never know with Ludlov. When you think he can finally take a break, it might be a big mistake. One more episode after this one, and we'll have to say goodbye to you again for a while. But as a great man once said, I'll be back. We are still writing The Voice of the Vampire, and we really want to finish as soon as possible, but we care a lot about the quality of our projects, so we'll have to ask for your patience again. You might be able to find smaller projects on Patreon though, and we'll be releasing a making of too, like last time. In the meantime, you can purchase the complete download of the extended edition of this story on Bandcamp and give it another listen. You can find the link in the description. Or you can listen or re-listen to our other Witch Hunter tales, which are Witch Hunter, of course, the original Ludlov story, and the first part of what is to become a trilogy. And then, from old to more recent, The Beast of the Western Wilds, The Treasure of Boneyard Bay, and of course there is The Will of the Woods, a completely standalone shorter story set in the fairy tale realm of the Infinite Woods. If you want to listen to the Witch Hunter stories chronologically, the order is The Treasure of Boneyard Bay, The Beast of the Western Wilds, The Hounds of Hübschdorf, and then Witch Hunter. If you want to get the extended edition of The Hounds of Hübschdorf, you'll be able to get hold of it by joining the rank of Witch Hunter Master on Patreon until next week. Once the final episode has been aired, this is no longer a future project, but a past project, so you'll be able to get it from the Grand General tier onward. You can also get exclusive Patreon merchandise on the platform, depending on your tier, or you can check out our Redbubble account for a design you like to give your loved ones for next Christmas, when they've had the chance to binge all of our stories, again and again. Don't forget to like and hype our video and to subscribe to our channel. And thank you so much, guys, for all your creative and heartwarming comments. They are a bright light for us, especially during the darkest time of the year. Keep sharing that Christmas spirit and our Witch Hunter tales. But first, let's find out where Tolfmann is before it's too late! The Hunter's House. Fulcrin led the 2 men along the same path where Ludlov and Tolfmann had had their encounter with the wolves. It looked different now, in the relentless rain, but Ludlov still recognized it. They were utterly drenched, and their gear felt like it weighed 3 times as much, but no one complained aloud. Despite everything that had occurred, the only thought on Ludlov's mind now was Tolfmann. His heart was heavy with worry. If they found the initiate dead, he didn't know what it would do to him. But already he swore under his breath that he would never again take a protégé under his wing. He couldn't stomach another loss, another death on his conscience. He would die to track down the Black Sickle and make them suffer for what they had done to his wife, but he wouldn't drag along anyone else to do it. Not anymore. Yet, here he was, in a legendary forest, home to monsters and cannibals, accompanied by a blind young villager.
Master Ludlov,
Garner said, as they made their way deeper into the woods.
What is it, Garner?
This hamlet we're headed for. What does it look like?
Ludlov had a hunch why Garner was asking this question.
It's small. There's a chapel and a square with a well house in the middle of it.
Is the well house made of stone?
Yes, it is.
And does the chapel have a bell tower?
Yes.
It's where I was born then,
Garner said simply, which confirmed Ludlov's suspicions. The witch hunter stopped walking for a moment and turned to face his young companion.
Are you afraid to return?
Garner shook his head.
I don't even really remember living in that place. I've only heard it described to me. It's just strange to be returning there.
Ludlov nodded, then turned and paced ahead.
Indeed, it is. But one thing is clear to me now.
Which is?
I don't think there were ever any brigands or raiders. Or if they were likely remnants, or deprived.
By Saint Wulfin himself. Do you actually think it was Grauwald, Master?
I'm certain of it. I think he sucked your village dry until it had nothing left to offer him, and then set his eyes on the next one.
Maiden's tears.
If we hadn't stopped him, Garner, Hübschdorf would have been the next ruin.
I think Victor knew that,
Garner said.
I think that's why he decided to come when you sent Fulgrim for help.
I think so too, Garner. He was a good man.
It was still dark, but dawn would soon come when they finally arrived in the ruined hamlet. The rain had softened, but it was still not over. The square had turned into a large, shallow puddle, thousands of ripples stirring under the patter of the rain.
We must find some clue,
Ludlov said.
We could begin by returning to the house where Tolfmann and I spent the night. Or we could investigate the chapel again, and the well.
I will follow your lead, Master.
Let's start at the well, then. I wouldn't put it past Grauwald to hide his victims down there. He did mention the threat of the weather conditions. Maybe there's a hole in the side of the well shaft or something.
Entering the well house, they were grateful simply to be out of the downpour for a moment. When Ludlov looked down the well, he immediately faced his own reflection.
The water inside must have risen almost to the top with all of that rainfall. If Tolkien was down there, he'd drowned. But somehow, I don't believe he was.
They left the well house and made their way to the chapel, where they took a quick glance around. Its already damaged roof had failed to withstand the rain. Even the house where Ludlov and Tolfmann had found shelter before the Initiate's disappearance had suffered additional damage under the heavy rain.
He must be in an underground construction that we didn't find upon our first visit. I think it's best if we check out all the remains of the houses, look for anything underground, like a cellar, storage, crawling space, something like that.
I'm afraid I'm not of much help there,
Garner said in a defeated tone.
Garner, you are invaluable. You can detect life.
They passed through the ruins one by one, starting across from the house that had given them shelter. They entered anywhere they could and found what looked like a classroom with some worn desks, an abandoned house with a significant amount of beds, and even something resembling a small stable. But they didn't find any sign of life. Eventually, they returned to the shelter house, as Ludlov had come to call it in his mind, and passed the adjacent ruins and houses. One of the closest constructions was an arched doorway with a worn wooden plaque that read, "Hunter's House." Ludlov recognized it from when he had scouted the area with Tolfmann. It was still the same, an open ruin, inside of it nothing more than a table. Ludlov wanted to pass on to the next building when he stopped in his tracks. The table. He remembered the table from his first visit. Back then, it had been standing perfectly upright. Now, it lay turned on its side. There were many traces of animals nearby, but something about the position of the table triggered Ludlov, and he decided to take a closer look. Garner was strolling behind him, looking dejected. Ludlov investigated the table and the floorboard underneath, but couldn't find anything else. There were some droppings betraying the presence of at least one animal, but that was hardly surprising. He was about to move on to the next ruin when a loud gasp from Garner startled him.
Master! There's life down there!
Ludlov turned back to the table, and with a grunt, he pulled it upright again. On the soaked floorboards, where the thick surface of the table had rested, the outline of a square was faintly visible. It looked like a trapdoor, although it lacked anything like a hinge.
Tolfmann! Tolfmann!
No response came. Ludlov felt his heart beating in his throat. This cellar must have been completely submerged. It seemed hopeless to believe that anyone could be alive down there.
Perhaps it's some animal. I thought I heard a creature in the well the last time I came here. It might have come here to look for a different hiding place once the well flooded. Garner, are you sure this life you're seeing is a man?
Garner frowned.
It's unclear. Sometimes it seems weaker, sometimes stronger, but yes, I do believe it's human. It might even be more than one, although there might be an animal too.
Tolfmann, please.
Tolfmann, please! If you're alive, if you're there, please say something! Do something!
Silence. Ludlov swallowed hard. He wanted to believe the initiate was down there and that he was still capable of rational thought, but his hope was dwindling rapidly. Still, he had to know the truth. After all, the cellar of a hunter's house was the perfect place to store captives. Ludlov's eyes grew wide.
What is it?
Garner wanted to know. Ludlov wondered.
Could it be? The sign on the door says Hunter's House. Grauwald told me I should be able to find the location on my own, with my hunter's skills. What if that was a hint?
The necromancer helped you retrieve your initiate?
Garner asked in disbelief.
Or his body,
Ludlov said, feeling a crushing weight inside.
We need to find out.
He took out his dagger and stuck it in the cleft that outlined the trapdoor to use it as a heft.
Do you still have your dagger, Garner?
Aye, master,
Garner said, and assuming Ludlov wanted it, he took it and offered it to him.
If you can do anything to let us know that you are still alive, Tolfmann, I order you to do so!
Disturbed by the silence that met him once again, as well as the desperation in his own voice, he made another attempt to lift the trapdoor with both daggers. But no matter how hard he pulled, the wood didn't budge. The rain had expanded it.
Please, Tolfmann. I can't lose another soul under my care. I can't remain a witch hunter like this. I can't.
He froze, gathering his wits and his strength, but they wouldn't return to him. Then out of the blue, an idea presented itself. He returned the grip of the dagger to the palm of Garner's hand and decided to use gravity to loosen the trapdoor. He got up and started to jump on the wood repeatedly, which sent an excruciating pain through his wounded leg. As he came crashing down, he scratched his already wounded leg on the broken wood. He only just managed to hold on to the wooden floor. His legs splashed into icy cold water below. Ludlov pulled himself up just high enough that he could rest his elbows on the floor. Then he quickly removed his leather coat, hat and weapons, save for his dagger tucked in his belt.
Stand guard, Garner. I'm going down.
Ludlov sat down and lowered his legs down the dark hole again. Then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and bit his lip. Ludlov had to suppress the reflex to gasp as he submerged himself entirely in the cold water. Coming up to the surface again, he opened his eyes and tried to ease his breathing. His lungs felt shrunken, and he could see his misty breath rising up like a ghost. Looking around, he saw nothing at first, but then, as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he scanned the space between the water surface and the wooden floor. It was barely big enough to keep his head above the water. Finding his footing somewhere, he tried to move along, grasping support beams and cracks in the wall to make his way. It was terribly claustrophobic, and he found himself fighting against the stinging pain in his wounds as well. Eventually, he raised his head up and shouted,
"Can you tell me in which direction to swim, Garner?"
Garner had heard him and replied. Ludlov could barely understand it, though, since his ears were full of water.
"You're doing very well, Master. Further, straight on."
Slowly, Ludlov made his way on. He thought he saw a shape drifting on the surface. In this gloom, it was hard to tell, but it might have been a man. Just then, Garner's voice suddenly screamed,
"Animal on your right!"
A creature came at the witch hunter, swimming closer and revealing its ugly bat-like face. As it let out a menacing hiss, it showcased 2 rows of sharp, white teeth that glistened in the dark. Long, sharp nails came dangerously close to his face, clawing at him. Ludlov took a deep breath and dove underwater. When he returned to the surface, the creature was still stalking him. Ludlov noticed a sharp piece of driftwood floating nearby. He grabbed it and struck at the creature again and again until it swam the other way, in the direction of the gap in the floor. Would it try to escape? Ludlov swam on towards the dark shape floating on the water, only just able to breathe with his eyes and nose slightly above the water. Above him, he heard the sounds of a struggle. Fulcrum seemed to be screeching, and Ludlov could only hope that Garner would be able to stand his ground. Then, unexpectedly, he saw eyes glinting in the dark. Although the eyes were barely visible, Ludlov's heart flooded with warmth. He knew it in his heart, even if he couldn't tell why. It was Tolfmann. A gag prevented the terrified young man from greeting him, but he was alive. As Ludlov swam around Tolfmann's body, he noticed another man, only barely holding on to life, clinging to his friend, trying to keep his nose above the water and holding Tolfmann up with his shoulder. Ludlov didn't know who the other captive was, but it seemed like the two of them had somehow kept each other alive against all odds. Even for Ludlov, who could freely move his hands and feet about, it was a challenge to keep his head above the surface. The witch hunter had to admire these two men for their resilience. He felt the wall behind them and took a few dives to estimate the situation. He discovered a metal ring on the wall with a chain and a length of rope attached to it. The other end of the rope was tied to Tolfmann's wrists. Ludlov took out his dagger and tried to hold on to the wall with his free hand. The turbulence made Tolfmann lose his balance, and the initiate went down underwater. Ludlov suppressed a curse. He hated to do this, but he had to free his initiate's hands first. He would be able to swim with his legs bound if he still had enough strength in his arms. Carefully, he cut the ragged ropes between Tolfmann's wrists. It took him several attempts, and he had to go under and resurface numerous times. He pushed Tolfmann towards the gap in the floorboard, but after a few strokes, he went underwater. Ludlov swam after him, hoping the other man would be able to hold on for a little while longer.
"Garner! Garner! Help him get out!"
There was a disturbing silence. But then Garner's face and arms appeared from above. Ludlov dove underneath the initiate's body, hoping to push him further up. When he felt Tolfmann being lifted out of the water, he was almost out of breath. He gasped as he resurfaced and made his way back towards the other man. They had lost 2 guards today, but he might be able to save another life. When he arrived back at the wall, the man was nowhere to be seen. There was no way this captive could have supported himself, so Ludlov had to go underwater again and feel his way towards the man. When he got hold of him, he decided to drag him by the rope to the surface instead of wasting time trying to cut his ties underwater. As he came to the opening again, he screamed,
Garner! I know, there's another one. I can see now.
Garner said in a calm voice. Ludlov pushed the man up for Garner to catch him. Once the stranger had been freed, Ludlov waited patiently until Garner's familiar arms came searching for him and helped him get out of the cold water. When at last Ludlov had managed to crawl out of the cellar, he allowed himself to roll onto his back on the floorboard, his head resting on a cobblestone while he caught his breath. His immense relief even overshadowed the physical pain he experienced in his limbs. Then he noticed Tolfmann, sitting against the remains of the wall base. His gag had been removed. The initiate opened his mouth, trying to speak, but he seemed too weak to do so. Ludlov wished he could shout out Tolfmann's name and grab him in a brotherly embrace, but exhaustion had taken hold of him, and he found himself unable to even move. He lay there, waiting for his breath to settle. No one spoke. It was a peaceful moment, however cold and uncomfortable. Suddenly, a wet gurgle startled him. When he had located the noise, he saw the corpse of a shadow lurker on the floorboard, lying in a puddle of blood, Garner's sword sticking out of its ribcage.
That creature attacked me,
Garner said, kicking the corpse with his boot.
It's a shadow lurker. They usually live underground, and they're good swimmers. Like vultures, they only eat dead meat, but they can attack when scared.
As soon as he'd caught his breath, Ludlov turned to Tolfmann.
I'm sorry I wasn't able to get here sooner. If I'd known where you were.
Don't worry. It's no use imagining what could have been. I made it.
Tolfmann fell silent and fixed his gaze far ahead, where the early glow of day announced itself from behind the treetops in the east. Then he looked up at the sky and rolled his eyes.
Of course. Now it stops raining.
I'm glad to see you again, my friend.
Tolfmann returned the smile with an earnest nod.
Thank you for coming for me, Master. And thank the goddess for Garner. Did he seek you out all by himself? Did he save you too?
I sent Fulcrin for help. The guards came from Hübschdorf to aid me.
The guards? Ludlov lowered his gaze.
Victor and Moritz didn't make it,
Garner explained, the pain still palpable in his voice. Raising his head, Ludlov glanced at the stranger on the floor beside him.
Who is this man?
I don't know,
said Tolfmann.
He was with me when I woke up. Do you recognize him, Garner?
Garner's white eyes turned to the man. In his own way, he was looking at him, searching for a clue for recognition.
I wish I did. He does feel somewhat familiar, but I can't see very much of him. I think he's dying, to be honest.
Let's find some shelter and have a rest. You must be exhausted after all you've been through.
Tolfmann looked at Ludlov with a probing eye.
I don't think you were simply having an autumn stroll in the meantime either.
No, I wasn't,
Ludlov said, the memory of Grauwald's knife cutting through his defenseless skin still fresh in his mind.
I'll explain later.
They took some time to rest right where they were before they tried to move on again. Eventually, it was Garner who rose first and helped up the others. By this time, the sun had risen somewhere beyond the clouds. A pale grey dawn greeted them, accompanied by a still, sombre mist, quietly hovering above the ground. Tolfmann led the way as Garner and Ludlov carried the stranger to the shelter house for some warmth and true rest.
I didn't thank you yet for coming for me, and for covering me at the Hunter's Cellar,
Ludlov said to Garner.
I couldn't leave you be, now could I?
Garner said.
You were the only one off to save Hübschdorf, and then you went and lost your companion.
You ignored the mayor's direct orders, didn't you?
Mayor Stolzerfuss hasn't been himself lately. I think the loss of the Hounds took a toll on his mental well-being, if you catch my meaning, Master. I don't think he truly realised what was at stake.
Well, in any case, you have my thanks. I'll make sure to let my superiors know about your bravery.
Would you do that?
I would, if you want me to.
Rest assured. Upon their return to the house where Tolfmann and Ludlov had spent that fateful night before the Initiate's disappearance, it was the witch hunter who lit the fire, using only natural means. Tolfmann had been reunited with the remaining contents of his backpack and was nestled in the same spot where he had been taken. Considering what he had been through, he looked well, but he was burning up with a fever and he had a cough. Ludlov removed his wet bandages, which had been reduced to dirty, wet strips of cloth. His wounds were burning, but somehow the dry heat of the fire eased the pain, at least for a bit. Exhausted, Tolfmann spoke little and simply enjoyed the warmth of the hearth until he fell asleep. The stranger slept as well, and kept on sleeping. His body was burning up from what was likely a serious infection. Upon further investigation, Ludlov discovered that the stranger had indeed contracted a severe abrasion on his thigh, which did not look too pretty. He tended to the villager's wound with what little damp cloth from his backpack he had left. The man had only looked up once while they had carried him and had returned to his slumbers right away. Ludlov could only hope that he would eventually wake up. It seemed to take Garner some time to fall asleep. He silently sat in the corner of the house, a distance away from the three of them.
Are you all right, Garner?
Ludlov asked. He nodded curtly.
Aren't you cold?
The witch hunter gestured towards the fire, and then, realizing his mistake, added,
It's warmer by the fire.
Pardon me, Master,
said Garner.
but you don't exactly smell like a hell-fearing hyacinth right now.
Well, it's not like that cellar was a bathhouse either. We will need our strength for the journey back to Hübschdorf. I believe we can all use some rest now, but I'll keep the first watch.
Are you quite sure, Master? You must be more exhausted than I am, considering what you've been through.
Ludlov shook his head.
I can't sleep. Not during the day. I never could. You should rest, Garner.
Garner eventually complied and granted himself a chance to catch some sleep. Before doing so, however, the blind man handed Ludlov a flask that he had kept hidden underneath his armor.
Waldmeister Elterquelle, he called it. The very best, and the very strongest. It might help to calm your nerves.
Ludlov thanked him, set it down somewhere close to him, and then told the young man to settle down and rest. Within minutes, Garner was snoring softly. Ludlov had spoken the truth to him. He wouldn't be able to sleep, but it wasn't just because of the daylight. Neither was it due to his still aching wounds or even the memories of his time in Grauwald's cave. He couldn't sleep mostly because he was anxious, and he couldn't quite tell why. He quietly wondered if he would ever feel at peace on this side of the eternal divide. He had gratefully accepted the Waldmeister, though, which seemed to at least pull the tension out of his muscles. He saved some for the others. Ludlov's eyelids grew heavy, and his breath slowed down. Some time later, he felt a jolt of consciousness passing through him as he realized he had in fact dozed off. It couldn't have been for more than a few minutes, though. He could not remember the last time he'd felt this exhausted. The following hours that passed were quiet and dull. Ludlov was alone without anyone to talk to. Even Fulcrin was out, probably hunting or keeping an eye on the ruins. All the others kept on sleeping, even as the fire died. With nothing else to do, Ludlov went outside to gather some firewood and rekindled the hearthfire. He didn't have that feeling of being watched anymore, but still he compelled himself to rush back. An irrational fear of finding an empty house upon his return was plaguing him. Rationally, he knew Grauwald was dead. He had stabbed him in the heart himself. He had felt the life force leave him and witnessed the champion reapers fighting over his soul, even if he had missed the final outcome of that confrontation. Still, he remained very cautious. He couldn't entirely shake off the way his assignment had come to an end. He knew there was nothing left for him to do but to return to Hübschdorf, allow them to mourn their victims, and let them rebuild their dog-breeding business. He was about to find closure, but he couldn't feel it in his heart. It was already dark outside when Tolfmann woke up at last. His fever had passed, and in his eyes Ludlov thought he detected part of that spark the young initiate had always had. The witch hunter offered him some of the Waldmeister, which caused the initiate to cough heavily. But it did seem to help brighten his spirits. They had nothing left to eat, though, and Ludlov was getting very hungry. He decided to consider it a fast and offered it up to the goddess. He looked at the stranger in their midst and realized the man's last meal might have been a week ago for all they knew.
Did you manage to speak to this man?
Ludlov asked Tolfmann, eyeing the unconscious, emaciated stranger.
Not a word, master. He regained consciousness for a while, enough to keep himself alive, but it didn't last long. I still don't know his name. He must be from Hübschdorf, though.
Ludlov studied the man. Sweat pearled on his white face. He might die before they made it back to the village. Still, they couldn't leave him behind here. At the very least, he should be buried near his own home.
What happened to you, master?
It's a long tale,
Ludlov said, feeling nauseated at the very memory of Grauwald's cave.
One I would prefer to tell another time. Suffice it to say that the evil plaguing the village of Hübschdorf has been defeated, in no small part thanks to the gods.
And do you include J.R.R in that summation?
I most certainly do, Tolfmann. Unfortunately, he's the only one who survived.
Tolfmann nodded in understanding.
There is something else, Tolfmann. The relic of Sancta Adalia. I took it with me and still need to return it to you.
He reached into his coat and took forth the item.
I'm sorry, Tolfmann,
Ludlov said carefully as he returned the little box to the initiate.
Why, Master Ludlov?
If I hadn't taken that little box along, I think the enemy might never have found you. This relic hides you from unfriendly eyes.
Tolfmann bowed his head as he accepted the relic, studying it.
All this time, I thought the strand of her hair inside was what mattered. But the box was fashioned from the wood of the very chest that kept Sancta Adalia safe. Perhaps that's where the real blessing resides.
Ludlov didn't know how to respond to that. The truth was likely more complicated than Tolfmann presumed. "Don't feel guilty, Master," Tolfmann said, looking up. "If you hadn't taken the box along, you would have been taken by the enemy, and I would have had to free you. I don't know how that would have turned out." Ludlov smiled.
We'll never know.
An hour later, Garner woke up.
"I dreamed of Moritz and Victor,"
he told Ludlov and Tolfmann.
"In my dream, they were wandering the misty plains of the hereafter, unable to rest. I worry about their souls."
Don't worry, Garner. We will bury them, and through my ordination as witch hunter, I can give them a temporary blessing. The rest will be up to a priest or priestess."
"Thank you, Master. Usually, Blessed Hora comes by on Graunacht. I could ask her to commend their spirits."
Graunacht. When is that exactly? I know it's soon.
"It surely is, Master. The night after tomorrow, in fact."
Can we make it back to Hübschdorf before that, considering the condition of Tolfmann and the other man?
"I can walk,"
Tolfmann said with stern conviction.
"As for my companion from the cellar, we can carry him together."
If so, then I don't want to waste any more time. We should leave at dawn.
"We will," said Tolfmann. "But first you need a decent night's rest, and I think we could all go for some extra hours of sleep, now that the biggest threat has been dealt with. We've barely had any for days."
I won't pass that up,
Ludlov said, grateful for the fact that at least he was relieved of the tension he had experienced throughout that day. He would rest now, knowing that his companion was safe and in good hands. "We've already had the opportunity to regain some of our strength," Tolfmann said. "Garner and I will set some traps so we can have a decent breakfast before we journey back to Hübschdorf." Ludlov gave a grateful nod, nestled himself against the wall near the fire, and didn't take long to fall asleep. Throughout the night, however, he was in a restless state of slumber, drifting in and out of consciousness. He was vaguely aware of Garner and Tolfmann talking, exchanging stories of their separate adventures and their lives outside of their efforts to save Hübschdorf. There were also hours of complete silence, as Tolfmann or Garner kept watch. When he woke up, Ludlov could barely remember the short, feverish dreams that had plagued him throughout the night, but he knew they had involved Grauwald. When the first weak rays of sunlight peered through the broken window, he felt at least somewhat rejuvenated. His wounds still hurt, though, and he suspected they needed some proper treatment as soon as they got back to the village. Garner and Tolfmann were up and about, and Garner presented him some rabbit stew they had made in a small pot over the fire. Ludlov was starving and almost burned his mouth gobbling the stew down.
Shouldn't I leave some for that man?
He asked Garner.
"No, Master. We already ate, and we tried to wake him, but he's in really bad shape."
Then I think his best shot is to get him back to Dr. Grauwald as soon as we can.
"Pardon me, Master. I know we should head back soon, but can we even move the man in this condition? Excuse me for saying this, but Tolfmann is ill, you're hurt, I'm blind, and that man seems very near to meeting the goddess in person."
I know, but we need to return anyway. I'm still worried about Hübschdorf. I believe Grauwald had a plan.
Garner shrugged.
"He's dead now, isn't he?"
He has to be.
"And what about Victor and Moritz? They both deserve an honorable service."
They do.
"I think,"
Garner began, halting as his white eyes glistened with tears.
"I think I know the best way to do so."
Ludlov looked at him.
I would like to go back to where they fell. I don't know how that fight ended, but I doubt those things are still out there. I know we won't have the time or the means to bury them properly, but I want to take their helmets. And then in Hübschdorf we will have a short ceremony in their honor. We could convince the mayor to send out a search party to return to the cave and retrieve their bodies, and maybe salvage some of the lost villagers' trinkets for their relatives. It's abandoned now anyway.
Ludlov nodded. It was a good idea, but Garner didn't have to go alone.
We will be traveling eastward on our way home. We can pass by that place and pay our respects together. I also believe the champion reapers will be gone by now.
Thank you, Master Ludlov.
The return to Hübschdorf. After they had collected their gear, the companions left for Hübschdorf. Ludlov had found a replacement lantern in one of the houses, and he still had some oil left in his flask. Using wood and rope found in the other houses, they also managed to construct a makeshift stretcher to carry the unconscious stranger. And so they set off in the early morning, leaving the dismal ruins of the hamlet behind, traveling back east and eventually south. The journey was a haze for Ludlov. When he wasn't telling his story to Tolfmann, he got lost in thought while Garner and the Initiate were talking amongst each other. He felt anxious and moody all through the trek, but he was delighted that the two seemed to get along so well, while he had at first sensed a subtle rivalry between them. It had stopped raining and the sky was mostly grey. Ludlov barely noticed the faint daylight colouring the misty autumnal woods in gold and red around him. When he wasn't distracted by all the worries, concerns and regrets swirling through his mind, the pain of his wounds tugged at him. The sun was climbing higher up into the sky when they reached the place where Moritz and Victor had fallen.
The last of the guards of Hübschdorf died here,
Garner said softly, sounding very different from the jovial young man Ludlov had met in Hübschdorf.
I will collect their helmets,
Ludlov said. He found Victor's helmet fairly easily. Its polished metal gleam was clearly visible in the sunlight, lying askew amidst the undergrowth. His other gear lay nearby. It was harder to detect his corpse on the soaky ground, amongst the scattered remains of the undead, but eventually they found it, beheaded and scorched. The dreadful result of an attack by the widow's evil magical blades, Ludlov thought. It had already been partially covered by dead leaves. For once, Garner's blindness was a blessing to him, and Ludlov was glad he didn't have to witness this. He quickly blessed Victor's remains within the limits of his ability, and then moved on. Ludlov had to search a while for Moritz's remains, but eventually he came across them. The youngest guard's gear was still mostly intact. He found the helm a little further ahead, lying upside down, splattered with mud. Some autumn leaves had already dwindled inside. He took the helm, wiped it clean and spoke a blessing over the body. He wished they could take the bodies along with them to Hübschdorf, but with the added weight of the stranger, they were in no condition to do so. Finally, Ludlov returned to the other men, who stood waiting on the road near the corpse of the armoured maceling. The cave was within sight, but neither Grauwald's body nor any evidence of the champion reapers remained. It would be logical to assume that one of them had been victorious. In that case, Grauwald's very body had been dragged off along with his soul into the infernal realm of an autarch. Ludlov couldn't be sure, though. Something still made him very uneasy, gnawing at him deep inside, and he couldn't quite tell what it was.
"What about your witch hunter friends, Master?"
Garner asked. Ludlov bowed his head.
I can't go back to that cave, Garner. I simply can't.
He looked away. Rarely had he so openly shown his weakness. It stung, and he wanted to move on as quickly as possible.
"We will ask for help when we're back in Hübschdorf," Tolfmann said. "I'm sure we'll find some volunteers to retrieve what's left of Brynjar and Svensson.
or at least of their gear.
If you're willing to go in, Tolfmann, you will find Brynjar's hat on the chest in the cave. It might suit you when you are ordained.
Tolfmann shook his head. No, Master. I don't think so, was all he said. The return to Hübschdorf went rather slow. Every man was tired and hurt, and with every step they took, the strangers seemed to inch closer to death. They had amply passed the border of the red ribbons when the sun was well into its descent into the western horizon. They decided to continue on a little further south before they sat down to make camp. Night was falling when they found a clearing and decided to set up a fire. Ludlov offered to gather the wood, which would be easy enough for Tolfmann to ignite, no longer having to hide his ability for the witch hunter. Finding wood dry enough to burn was more of a challenge, however. As Ludlov wandered a little while away from the clearing, he heard voices, whispering amongst each other. On his guard, Ludlov drew his rapier, carefully approaching the muffled talking. He thought he saw a group of men between the trees and considered sneaking closer, but then thought better of it.
Who goes there?
He shouted into the night.
We are the men of Hübschdorf,
Came the reply.
Who are you? Ludlov of Seven Peaks.
There was some gentle laughter, and then a group of men appeared from between the foliage. Some of them were carrying lanterns, which spread a warm glow into the gloomy forest. There were at least 7 of them, and Ludlov was impressed with their ability to adhere to the woodland protocols by keeping silent. He immediately recognized the leader of the group as Mark, the huntsman who had warned against his journey beyond the border.
Well then, Master Witch Hunter,
Mark said.
you've proven me wrong by returning. I must admit, I'm glad about it.
The tall man shook Ludlov's hand and patted his shoulder.
I hope you're not the only one, though.
No, praise the goddess. Tolfmann and J.R.R. are with me as well. We were just making camp.
What about the guards?
Asked another man, a bald and hunched figure in a leather apron.
Alas, Victor and Moritz made the ultimate sacrifice for Hübschdorf.
Maiden's tears,
Mark said, shaking his head.
They will be honored and avenged.
The only revenge you can offer is a holy life in service of the goddess, Mark. They were felled by demonic beings.
It sounds like you have a tale to tell, Master, if that is true.
It is, and I do,
Ludlov assured him.
Please join us. Perhaps you can help us identify the final member of our company.
The witch hunter led the other men to the clearing where J.R.R. and Tolfmann were preparing the camp.
Mark! Reiner! And Gunther!
J.R.R. called out with a smile.
It's good to see some familiar shapes. Garner, you're still around.
There was some hugging and back-patting.
Well met,
Mark said, nodding towards J.R.R. and Tolfmann. Some of the companions remained standing, looking at them cautiously. One was carrying a barrow. There was another with a pitchfork who was giving them a distrustful look. 3 other men sat down with them by the fire. Some started searching their bags for some scraps, and before long, they were all sharing the food the men had brought. As he was about to join them, Mark's gaze went to the stretcher.
Praised be the goddess,
he said, kneeling down beside it. Do you recognize this man? Tolfmann asked. J.R.R. was unable to identify him. He's in such bad shape.
Of course I do, even if he hardly looks like himself,
Mark said.
It's Olva, the innkeeper.
Thank you for listening to the 10th episode of the Hounds of Hübschdorf, a witch hunter tale. This will be the last time you hear my voice. Well, that's not true, but at least the last time in the outro to an episode of the Hounds of Hübschdorf, since the next episode will be the final episode and you can listen to the end credits instead. We hope you enjoyed this episode and that you're ready to wrap up this turbulent story with us next Friday. As you know, this is a complete story for you to enjoy from start to finish. However, there are a number of extra chapters in the extended edition that is available on Amazon if you prefer to read a book, or on Bandcamp and Patreon if you like the audiobook. You can get the extended edition of the audiobook on Patreon from the Master Witch Hunter tier on this week until Friday, and then after Friday from the Grand General tier on. This is a higher tier, but then the story will come along with all our other created audiobooks. You can also simply join us on Patreon for free. There are currently 34 free members and 32 paying members, supporting us for an amount of their choice that is comfortable for them. You can always change tiers, and you can pledge from as little as $1 a month, which is only $12 a year, which could get us a nice Christmas ornament, for next year probably. And as a paying member on Patreon, you'll get access to extra story content like bloopers, the very first audio drama version of Witch Hunter, an old audio story from the Mean's long forgotten past, and Wall Street Journal's best-selling author J.D. Horn's short story December, dramatized by Audio Epics. On Patreon, you help us cover the costs of our sound effects and music, which are of course legally purchased, as well as our editing software, which is Audition, without any AI tools whatsoever, since we just refuse to use it. We'd rather watch Star Wars episodes 7 to 9 tied to a chair than use AI. To those supporting our channel on Patreon, we give our special thanks. Amy and Dallas Austin, Antonio Padula, Peter Strandkrone, Cody H., Joe Goth Oer, Matt Patain, Cameron Brantley, Tony Ranico, Liam Gabriel, Mix and Match, Caitlin Bourgeois, Kadir Hussein, Yishi Dusht, Gander, Osarion, Alu, Arno Teva, Ryan Stock, Jay, Rob Skinner, Tim the Gothic Horror Guy, Johnny White, Sue Morrigan, Dustin Garner, Remy van Veen, Macy, Hannes Fouche, Jean Gerbet, and Victor Unestig and Ethan Foster, our newest patrons in the Witch Hunter Master tier. Thank you so much, Victor and Ethan, for your support. If you're still listening and still in the spirit of Christmas, why don't you all write a word that rhymes with the Mother of Christ, Mary? Or if you feel ambitious, write us a poem or pitch your next epic werebear romance buddy cop mermaid heist novel to us. Anyway, we wish you a Merry Christmas and an amazing New Year's Eve and New Year. We'll be celebrating just the four of us at home, thinking about our adventures, real and imagined, in 2025 and our plans for the future. We hope 2026 will be your best year so far, and that you'll be able to experience lots of new adventures, also real and imagined. The next premiere is next Friday. It will be the 11th and final episode of the Hounds of Hübschdorf. We will be available in the chat to offer a shoulder to cry on, and honestly, we might want to cry a bit on your shoulder as well. We'll see you next week for the final episode of the Hounds of Hübschdorf. Bye!